I can just imagine on that day, June 7th, when a lawyer is confronted and confesses to having stolen over $500,000 from a client, and he has a tiger like Mark Tinsley on his tail pursuing discovery in the case involving the death of Mallory Beach, and having a father, for the most part, on his deathbed. I could imagine, or really can't imagine, but I know it had to have been quite a bit going through your mind on that day. But amazingly, to have you come and testify that it was just another ordinary day, that my wife and son and I were out just enjoying life. Not credible, not believable. You can convince yourself about it, but obviously you have the inability to convince anyone else about that. So if you made any such arguments as a lawyer, you would lose every case of that, like that. Cases you will never have an opportunity to argue anymore, except perhaps your own as you sit in the Department of Corrections. Anything further?
No, sir.
All right, Mr. Murdaugh, I sentence you to the State Department of Corrections on each of the murder indictments in the murder of your wife, Maggie Murdaugh. I sentence you for a term of the rest of your natural life for the murder of Paul Murdaugh, whom you probably loved so much. I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life. Those sentences will run consecutive. Under the statute involving possession of a weapon during a violent crime, there is no sentence where a life sentence is imposed on other indictments. That is the sentence of the court, and you are remanded to the State Department of Corrections. And officers may carry forth on the imposition. Yes, sir.
May we approach?
Yes, sir.
All right, so there you have it. Alex Murdaugh, who was convicted of killing his wife and son in 2021, sentenced to 2 life sentences for those murders. There was an additional charge associated with the weapon, but with 2 life sentences, there was no need to impose a sentence on that. We want to bring in Vinoo Varghese, who's been standing by with us. He's a defense attorney and former prosecutor, also a visiting faculty member at Harvard Law School's Trial Advocacy Workshop. Vinoo, you heard what is this live right now? I just want to ask producers. Just want to make sure we're not missing anything. Okay, so I'm sure that the producers will sort of indicate to me if there's anything else happening in the courtroom that would be of interest. But Vinoo, I want to bring you in. The judge spoke for a very long time, and there was almost a little bit of back and forth between Murdaugh and the judge. There were no victims who came forward to speak, which is not surprising because the victims would be members of his own family. His brother, who cried on the stand about cleaning up after the shooting, cleaning up the murder scene. His son, last surviving son, has been there the entire time, also chose not to speak. I want to get your take, Vinoo, on some of what you heard from the judge, because Nancy, I don't know, it seemed like the judge, it wasn't just about the murders for him. It was about the fact that Alex Murdaugh was an attorney. He was part of this justice system, this legal system. And there was almost sort of a personal reaction, I felt, to an individual who he had known, who had presented cases in front of him.
That they had a relationship.
Right, betraying the system.
Yes.
Not just betraying his family, but betraying the system.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just him, as he was mentioning the portrait of his grandfather that hung in the courthouse that they had to take down because Alex Murdaugh is part of a legal dynasty that has practiced law in that county for a century now. And to have this happen, Vinoo, we were talking during the sentencing about how it felt like there was a conversation really happening between the two. Is that standard? Is that typical that or does it kind of show you what kind of relationship the judge and the defendant had in this case?
Well, if I were Murdaugh's lawyer, I would not have let him spoken at that moment. It's something, because nothing good is going to come of that. The judge was basically challenging him, and took the quotation that was used during trial, from Sir Walter Scott. Tangled web we weave when we practice to deceive. It seemed the judge had maybe never heard that before, but to have Murdaugh actually repeat it was not a good look. The only good part of it that came out was when Murdaugh said that he didn't kill anyone. He maintained his innocence. He said so in a forceful manner. But I don't think there was any good that was going to come of that. And the judge questioned why he waived his right to make a statement. I think his lawyers at that point should have said, Judge, we object to this whole rushed sentencing process. And that's why we have advised Mr. Murdaugh to waive that right that he has. If you gave us time to actually prepare a mitigation package, a real time to make an argument before you, then we would have, then Mr. Murdaugh would have said something on his behalf. But his lawyers didn't say that. So, and then you have this, the judge making his commentary about Murdaugh.
Listen, Vinoo, I want you to stand by, because we're just going to pivot quickly to Nikki Battiste, who's been following this trial from the very beginning, was in the courtroom. So, Nikki, once again, sort of the cameras zoomed in on Alex Murdaugh's face, and, once again, it was difficult to read. I saw no change in the facial expression. I saw him blinking, but he maintained his innocence to the very end here. Tell us what it was like in there.
Yeah, so it was interesting to watch Alex, because throughout the trial, he was always rocking. This was sort of the motion he did, showing some emotion at times for 6 weeks. So it's notable that today he showed absolutely no reaction at any point whatsoever. He walked in looking pretty calm. He looked a little more anxious, I'd say, but really never showed any emotion. We saw him for the first time in a jail jumpsuit in this courtroom, not in a suit as he's worn for the last 6 weeks. We heard the prosecutor first address the judge, and say, this man, Alex Murdaugh, is a cunning manipulator who put himself ahead of his family. He also said the jurors gave Maggie and Paul Murdaugh a voice. I was a little surprised when Alex did. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but he had decided to address the judge, saying, I'm innocent. I'd never hurt my wife, Maggie, or my son, Paul. But again, this judge, very conservative, very strong words, and a little chilling when the judge noted that before this trial, there was actually a painting of Alex Murdaugh's grandfather, who was also a prominent lawyer, hanging in that courtroom that he had to remove. And now here is Alex Murdaugh facing a double life sentence. Anne-Marie and Nancy?
Yeah, and it goes back to that quote we were just talking about, the tangled web we weave. Just given the history of all of this, we were remarking on how this felt certainly a little different than these normal sentencings because of that shared history between the two of them.
I think Nikki had got to go. She's a hardworking woman. We will bring in Vinoo. We'll bring Vinoo back. So let me ask you, Vinoo, because I sensed a wee bit of sort of you had some mild criticism for the judge when we spoke a little bit earlier. When the judge was speaking, I almost got the sense. I almost wanted to say, did you watch the Netflix special? It was like he was incorporating not just what he heard during this murder trial, but the reaction outside of the courtroom, the history of the Murdaugh family. He talked about the influence that the family has had over the legal system in this area for so long. He talked about Alex Murdaugh prosecuting people in his courtroom, and some of those people receiving the death penalty.
Yes, I thought that in particular when he said that stood out.
I thought it was interesting because I thought it felt like he was sort of going beyond just the boundaries of what was heard and testified to within the courtroom. I don't know if you found that too, Vinoo.
The only thing I took, I would say, potential exception to, everything you mentioned, I thought in light of what had happened, and if he believes, which he does, that Alex Murdaugh is guilty, then it was within the realm of things a judge can say, in sentencing and the factors he can consider. And I think he left something out, which was, you are a disgrace to your family heritage. He could have added that. I said, your family was respected here. You've destroyed that. You've destroyed your family name. The thing that kind of caught me, and I remember writing it down as he said it, was the most heinous crime known to man. I imagine there could be people who could disagree with him, particularly if you kill and fly a plane into the Twin Towers and kill 3,000 people, right? I mean, there's different ways of looking at this. You can certainly say that it was a heinous crime. How could you kill yourself? How could you live with yourself for having killed your wife and your son? And when the interesting part, and this is where I think Murdaugh, could have done better, was when the judge said to him, well, maybe it wasn't you, it was your addicted self, the monster you've become.
Yes.
Murdaugh at that point should have said, Judge, I didn't kill them.
Right.
I already told you that. He stood silent. He almost looked like he nodded.
You're right.
And I was like, ugh, that's not a good look for him.
Yeah.
And if anything, he didn't stay stone faced enough.
Yeah.
But well, I was going to ask Vinoo, at the same time, though, I mean, a jury did convict him of murder, so he has been found guilty. Given all of that, do you think that if he had spoken out and said something and showed remorse of any kind here, it really would have made any difference at this point?
Absolutely not. But, the way this has been a public trial, right? So he's not only been convicted in court, but he's been convicted in the court of public opinion. So part of this he's got to look at and say, you know what, I've taken this position, I argued this position, and, it needs to stay consistent. And I think that would have been important for him to have said that, at least something when he said, no, Judge, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. And it looked like he gave up at that point. Well, and, the judge spoke about an appeal process. There's no doubt that there's going to be an appeal. And as I mentioned when we were speaking earlier, Murdaugh taking the stand at that point has basically, for the most part, killed his appellate chances, because he's put it on a case, and the appellate courts forgive prosecutors for wrongdoing when a defendant puts on a case.
So listen, that's what I was going to ask you. The judge and everyone expects an appeal. I know you can't, this was a weeks-long trial, so you can't go through everything, but sort of your superficial glance, on what grounds would there be an appeal?
Well, the main thing was the evidence that was allowed in for all his financial misdeeds. I mean, the defense has a real strong argument that so improperly tainted the jurors' ability to be fair and impartial, and that forced Murdaugh to take the stand to try to explain away and to deal with those things, because otherwise, if he had been given, or if those financial crimes had been left out, well, then have the prosecution without any sort of motive. And, I spoke 2 days ago with some of your colleagues on the morning show, and I told them that, the idea that the prosecution theory, to me, sounded crazy when you think about it, that the man killed his wife and son to distract attention away from financial investigation. That is a huge stretch to go from fraudster to murderer. You usually don't see this as you go from a white collar crime to a blue collar crime. I mean, so that's a stretch. And I believe that if the judge had not allowed those financial cases to come in, then Murdaugh has the ability to just deal with this from basically an academic point of view and see where the prosecution could go wrong. And he might have had a better shot at an acquittal.
Given all that, the jury and the judge have made their decision. And Vinoo, we really appreciate all of your insight through it all.